Seeing Nat come in reminded me that I think Harding is on spring break this week, and it ends.
They were on spring break
last week, and it ends today, right?
She's not
So,
there, but I'm not there.
huh?
She's through it, Harding.
Yeah, just remind me.
Oh.
But if she wants to go back, she could.
Her mother said no.
All that to say this, when the colleges take spring breaks, inevitably something bad happens, and Harding had a student that was killed in traveling this last week. Free Hardman's spring break is coming up next week, and so you put several thousand students on the road all at one time, I mean, the chances are good that something's not going to go well. So keep those kids in your prayers when they're traveling, and we've had some of our own that have been traveling, so we want to remember that. I want us to continue in our series on miracles. If you were watching the passage that Evan read, it was a miracle where Jesus had restored sight, and he told them, "Don't tell anybody." And the next line says, and immediately they went and told everybody. Miracles are the kinds of things that you can't keep silent about. They certainly couldn't. And I want us to study about one of those today. We'll be reading several verses from John chapter 9 if you're someone who likes to follow along in your Bible, and or we'll have some that we'll read that won't be on the screen this morning from John 9. So you can be turning there. In John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, Jesus and his disciples had left the temple. They passed by a man who the scripture tells us was born blind. He was likely sitting out at some sort of a public place, as was his custom, and no doubt was asking for money from those who passed by. When Jesus saw this man in his suffering and sorrow, we're to believe that Jesus is moved by what he saw. And in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, part of that verse tells us that he is touched with the feeling of our infirmities. And it seems as though this blind man had gotten the attention of Jesus. And the Lord had compassion on him. He's going to instruct the blind man on what he needs to do. And the blind man is going to do exactly what Jesus tells him to do in every detail. And we're going to find out that the blind man is going to receive his sight. Now, why this particular miracle? Well, it's an unusual one in a sense because he gives sight to a man that we are told was born blind. There are other examples, like the one that Evan read, where there were others who were blind, but we have no indication that they were blind from birth. This, as far as we know, is the only congenital blindness that existed for which we have the performance of a miracle. But it's not unusual that out of the 37 miracles that we have recorded in Scripture, 6 of them have to do with healing blind people and having their sight restored, as we saw in Matthew 9 that Evan read, those 2 men who got their blind eyes healed. And so we have this man. And we start in John 9, and now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. His disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him." This man, because he was born blind, has never been able to see. He's never seen the faces of his parents. He's never witnessed, he's never seen a sunrise, he's never seen a sunset, he's never seen that glow, he's never seen the hillside that existed in Palestine. He's never seen the pop-up flowers, the beauties that God had placed even in their region of the country where it was very, very dry. He was born blind. And most likely, because of his blindness, he was probably a well-known person in Jerusalem. No doubt many people were acquainted with this man because he's one that you would pass by all the time. Yesterday, when Lisa and I were in downtown Nashville, we walked by a woman who was asleep out on the sidewalk. Now, we saw another one or two that were asleep on the air vents where the heat comes up. This person was just laid out on the sidewalk. And you know what yesterday morning's temperature looked like. You can't walk past that person and not have some thought about that. It's not possible. And when I think about all the people that pass by this guy every day, and they knew that he had never been able to see, they were well acquainted with his disability. Now, the disciples asked Rabbi Jesus a question. This man, who was it that sinned? Was it him or was it his parents who sinned that he was born blind? There was a common belief in that age that either you personally had committed a sin or your parents had committed a sin, and that was the root cause for your physical disorder. And so the assumption was made, he's blind, therefore it either had to be him or it had to be his parents. This notion of transmigration is that if your parents sinned, the punishment for that could be transmigrated into someone else. And they would pay the price for it. And that's why they asked the question. Was this person being punished for sin that he had committed? Or was it some sin that somehow existed in what? His pre-existence? Because he's born blind. And so they're trying to ask Jesus about this notion of who did the sin. And his response was an interesting one. He says, neither of them. The blindness was not caused by sin. Instead, he says, it was so that the works of God could be shown or revealed in him. Jesus did not mean that they weren't sinners, that it wasn't either of them that sinned. He's simply asking the question of whose sin was it. And his answer of neither, he says, was because there was going to be an opportunity for the power, the manifestation of God to be shown in him. And in this case, what he's saying is, he's blind, and we're going to use that as an object lesson for you. You get to see the miracle. You get to witness what's going to happen. Now, it's also true that God can make use of our afflictions to help perfect our character. But God doesn't send the afflictions, and I think that's something that we need to notice. God is not the author of human misery. We have no reason to believe that. But this man was born blind. And so here's what we're told. Verses 6 and 7. When he had said these things, Jesus spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva. He anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. He said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated the word said. So he went and washed, and he came back seeing. Now, it's kind of fascinating to think about what happened here. Jesus, in the verses that we skipped over, we'll see later, discussed with them what his mission was. And here, what he says is, I'm going to show you, and he bends down, he spits basically in the dirt, he makes up some form of clay, and he sticks the clay on the blind man's eyes, tells him that he needs to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which, by the way, there's no known virtue to the pool of Siloam. It could have been any pool, and it would have had the same outcome if he did what Jesus had told him to do. It was a test of the man's faith. And the virtue, if you will, is not in the pool of Siloam. The virtue is whether or not this man is going to be obedient to do what he's told. And so we see it. And so think about this for a second. They are in the temple area, which is right up here. And this is a map of Jerusalem, and they're going to go down to the Siloam pool, which is right there. And here's the reason I'm showing you that. Because it is 1/3 of a mile from the temple down to the pool. 1/3 of a mile doesn't seem like that far, but it might if you've got eyes full of clay and can't see where you're going. And so maybe that was just a little bit of the test. You know, if you'll notice, there were some other areas up in here where he could have sent him. There were some closer pools. He sends him all the way down there. Will he be obedient? And so he goes down and he washes in the pool. Now, the scriptures tell us that the blind man went and washed, and he came forth seeing. The blessing of sight for this man came when he was obedient to God. Whatever infirmity it was that kept him from having the ability to see, he now sees light. And I found it interesting to think about that it was Saul who was blinded by the light and then made to where he couldn't see. And this notion of seeing and blindness and light and the ability to know what's going on, you know, it seems to tell us that it is a blessing for us when we follow instructions that God has given us, that our eyes can be opened to the beauty of what God has available for us. I think sometimes when you look at these miracles, think about the ones we've already seen. We know that on the one hand, Jesus could heal at a distance. He did it from a different town. We know that sometimes He's going to touch people. We know that like He did in the passage that Evan read. We know that on other occasions He's just going to speak the miracle into existence by a word. And when you think of all of the ways the miracles occurred, I think it's easy to see that we can conclude in every instance that the method that was chosen was the proper one in the mind of Christ for that particular situation. And that in every one of those instances, the people who are touched by the miracle that is performed, whether it was through touch or healing or distance or whether it was through a word, in every instance, their faith is increased tremendously. Obedience, the demonstration of the love of the Lord, and an increase in faith. Don't forget about that. Now, he's healed. And here's what we find out. Verses 8 through 12. He's questioned. First, he's questioned by a man, or by his neighbors. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is this not the one, is not this he who sat and begged?" And some said, "This is he." Others said, "Well, he is like him." He said, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" And he answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed, and I received sight." And then they said to him, "Where is he?" They have a question. Now, it's sort of fascinating to think. I would love to know. Here's one of those heaven questions that you're going to put on the list. I would love to know, after he dipped in the pool of Siloam and all of a sudden he could see, how did everybody else recognize that this man could see? I don't know. There was something about him that was observable. Maybe it was him walking along without somebody holding his arm. Maybe it was him picking up rocks and staring at them, or flowers or something. He had never seen anything before. But they noticed a change in him immediately. to an extent where they wonder if this is really him. You see the questioning? Is this the guy that we know that forever, since he was born, has been laying out there on the road begging for money because he's blind? Is that him? Well, it looks like him. It kind of seems like it might be. What did he say? It is me. Jesus made, how did this happen? Jesus made an ointment and he put it on my eyes made out of mud and he told me to go down and dip and pull slow, and I did, and I can see now. Where's this guy who told you to do that? Then we read, beginning in verse 13 of chapter 9, they brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Catch that? Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he received his sight. He told them the same thing. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He's a prophet." But when the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight, they asked them, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? So how then does he now see?" And his parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we don't know. Or who have opened his eyes, we don't know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself." And his parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. And therefore his parents said, that he is of age, ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, and though I was blind, now I see." And when they said it to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them again, "I told you already. You didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples?" Okay. This gets fascinating real quickly. The neighbors talk to him. Now the Pharisees want to talk to him. And what do they point out? He did this on the Sabbath. We know you can't do things like this on the Sabbath. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. You mean like healing somebody who's been blind from birth, like raising someone from the dead, like feeding people who are famishing, those kinds of things we can't do on the Sabbath? The Pharisees said, let's find out about this. Get his parents in here. Are you his parents? Yes. Is that your son? Yes. How did this happen? We don't know. Who did it? We don't know. Give praise to God it happened. Why? Well, their reply was based upon the instruction that they'd already heard, that if anybody professed that this was the Christ, the Son of God, they were supposed to be excommunicated, kicked out of the temple, not allowed to go back in. That was their stated rationale there for why they didn't do this. Then we find out, starting in verse 28, then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we don't know where he's from." The man answered and said to them, "Why is this a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes? Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind." If this man were not from God, he couldn't do nothing. He could do nothing. And they answered and said to him, you are completely born in sins, and are you teaching us? And they cast him out. Get that guy back in here again. Notice, they reviled him. They spoke all manner of evil and hurt toward him. But did you notice what he said in his defense? Since the world started, ain't no one ever brought somebody's sight back who was born blind. I don't know about you, but I suspect that was a fact. Because you and I both know that this many years after this miracle, that today, even with all of our advanced technologies and all of the abilities that we have to fix sight issues, it is an absolute rarity that they have been able to give sight to anyone who was born blind. And that's only been in recent years. There was a video I think I saw a year or so ago about a small child that saw his mama for the first time after some type of surgery that had been performed. So when this man says, from the beginning of the earth, nobody's ever been able to give somebody their sight who was born blind. That was a spectacular thing. And the assessment he made, if this man were not from God, he couldn't do this. And so pay attention. And then it says that because he basically stood up, you were completely born in sins and you're trying to teach us, the Pharisees, you heathen, get out of here and don't come back to the temple again. He was excommunicated. Why? Well, because he stayed true to the one who healed him. He stayed true to the great physician. And it was because he did that he was reviled, he was disowned, he was repudiated, and he was cast out. And it gives us some idea about how challenging this was. And then we find, beginning in verse 35, Jesus heard that when they cast him out, when he had found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking to you. And then he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who may see those who will not may be made blind. And then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind also? And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you say, we see. Therefore you have sins that remain. The whole notion of what this miracle was designed to do in the mind of Christ. On hearing about the misfortune of the man previously blind, the Master looked him up and asked him if he believed on the Son of God. And it says that once Jesus communicated to him that the one who is talking to you is the Son of God, it says that he confessed the Lord and he worshipped him on the spot. And what did he say? Lord, I believe. I believe. That's what it took. Now, there are some lessons here, I think, that we can pull away from this miracle real quickly. One is we skipped over verse 4 and 5. In verse 4 and 5, Jesus said, I have come that I can fulfill the works of the one who has sent me. And part of that was to describe what his mission was supposed to be as he was coming to be the light of the world. That notion of setting light is symbolic for what's going to happen with this man in the miracle. But another lesson that I think that we can pull away from the miracle is that we can think about the fact that there is a time that's going to come when Jesus says, let me go back and pick that up. When he says in verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day, for night is coming when no one can work. You and I, we get to live in the day. It's our day. And there's a day coming when we're not going to be able to work anymore. You know, we refer to that to our death when our work is over. We rest from our labors. And what we're doing in the meantime during our day is we are in preparation for eternity. And Jesus, according to verse 5 of the chapter, is the light of the world. He created a light. He made eyes to see it and to be able to rejoice in it. And for you and I, He is the spiritual light that we get a chance to rejoice in. And what He requires of us is essentially the same thing that He required of this particular man, and that is obedience. And those passages that are on the screen remind us repeatedly that there is an intention there that God wants us to be obedient. And obedience is better than sacrifice. And so you can come in and you can do all kinds of wonderful things. You remember the Jews were all about all these sacrifices and doing them in certain ways and on certain days and certain times of the years. And it couldn't be it couldn't be something that was down the flock. It had to be the first animal of the flock. It had to be of the first fruits that were supposed to be given, not the fruits that have been laying around for a while. That He always had these expectations of what sacrifice was going to look like and what they were expected to do. And the scribes and the Pharisees described in tremendous detail. The prophets had given them what He wanted them to do. And so sacrifice was huge. And Jesus now says it's better to be obedient than it is to sacrifice. It's what He wants from you and me. He wants us to do what we're told. I've been a parent. And I know what it's like when your kids do what they're told. And I know what it's like when they don't. And I had a conversation with somebody this week about the last time I spanked my oldest child. How old is he now?
39.
He's 39. The last time I spanked him, when he went in my room and found an old pistol that I had inherited from my father and grandfather, and he went someplace else and he found where the little package of bullets was kept, and he loaded the gun in the house and he fired it into my mother's bed. On accident, nonetheless. And he got spanked. I think he was about 13, which is old for spanking kids. But you know, part of the spanking was punishment, but a whole lot of it was to let him know how disappointed I was in him. We relish when our kids are obedient. We hurt just a little bit when they're disobedient because we're disappointed. And I think that's what happens in this particular notion of being obedient to God. How many times in Scripture do we find where the disobedient children that He created are the ones that hurt Him the most? But I also want you to really catch something here about this miracle. And that is the response that is embedded in the miracle from three different groups. First, there's the Pharisees. It didn't matter that they had all the evidence in the world, that they were now in the presence of the Son of God who had demonstrated something that no one had ever been able to do before Him, give somebody the miracle of sight. We're going to know about healing people from another town and gets well. We're going to find out about raising people from the dead. It didn't make any difference what they saw, what they heard. They had preconceived notions about what religion was supposed to be like, and Jesus didn't fit it, and so the Pharisees weren't going to have any of it. They just shut off their minds to Him. We still have people that do that. Then we've got these folks like His parents. You know, I don't know how old the young man was, or Simeon's young. But if you have a child that is born blind, and you know what his life has been like every day, one, as parents, no doubt there has to be just a little tinge of guilt that you gave birth to a child that was born blind. But now comes the day when he gets to have his sight, and they said, yes, he's ours. Who did it? We don't have anything to do with it. We don't want to know nothing about it. We weren't there. We don't know why. There are a whole bunch of people today who it doesn't make any difference what they see and hear and learn. They're still trying to be neutral. Tom was talking about his emergency lessons that he's prepped. I'm working on an emergency lesson about what is the difference between being a fan and being a follower. Because I think we have some people who honestly are fans of Jesus, who are fans of the Bible. They're just not followers. And I kind of get the impression that this parent, no doubt there had to be some joy in their life that their son now gets to see. But we're going to try to stay at arm's length here because we don't want to be cast out. And the third group that we have here, beyond these folks who would choose today to be like nominal Christians, like they were nominal followers, is how this young man behaved. He told the simple truth of how he was healed. This man who is called Jesus, he gave his name, is the one who did it. He affirmed that he must be a prophet. When he's confronted, he gave them the evidence. The second time, he gave them the evidence. The third time, he says, why are you not listening? He stood up and stood up and stood up again. And I think it was his courage, based upon what he had seen and what had happened to him, that helped him to see the light and to know who the giver of the light was. But don't miss the fact that in his conviction, he suffered consequences. He got kicked out of the temple. He was told to never come back. He got the excommunication. And the obvious application for you and I is that, you know, we need to stay in the blessings of God, and we need to remain faithful no matter what the persecutions and whatever forms they may come. But don't ever forget this, that there are consequences of conviction, but there are also the enjoyment of reward. He may not have gone back in the temple anytime soon, but you know what? He got up the next day and he could see. And that's pretty cool.